Hello and welcome to World Today. My name is Salia Stremska and I'll be your host tonight. We're joined by Alexandr Hrebet, journalist from the Kyiv Independent, and we'll discuss the latest developments in the war in Ukraine, as well as the recent G20 summit held in India. Good evening and welcome, sir.
Good evening.
So let's start our discussion with a recent visit of European Parliament President Roberta Metsola to Lviv. Why do you think this is so important?
Every visit of the foreign leaders, including the European institutions like European Parliament, is very crucial for Ukraine. This is another step to support Ukraine and to show that the people are not afraid coming into Ukraine, and especially to Lviv, which is 1,000 kilometers away from the front lines. That's why it's important, and Roberta Metsola is supporting Ukraine vocally, really loudly in the European Parliament, and this support is heard in the many other capitals of the world, not only in the European Union.
And do you think that this could speed up the EU negotiations for Ukraine? I mean, is it just a gesture, or perhaps there's something behind this?
Every such a visit, they probably did talk about the Ukrainian accession into the European Union. And of course, Roberta Metsola cannot decide on her own only these things, but it's another step forward towards the Ukraine accession into the EU.
Right. She did make a statement that she hopes that the accession negotiations could begin this year. So fingers crossed. But let's move on to a more worrying topic. Bakhmut, that has been the place that has been an epicenter of fighting for the last several months. Now, unfortunately, it appears to be falling into the Russian hands, if we have accurate information. Could you shed some light on what's going on that front line?
So according to the general staff, Ukraine's general staff, Ukrainian army are still defending the town of Bakhmut in eastern Donetsk Oblast, and all the Russian claims, sometimes they say they captured the Solidar, for example, in the outskirts of Bakhmut, and it happened only after a couple of months. So Prigozhin and the other Russian warmongering warlords, let's say, they claimed more than one time they already encircled the Bakhmut, but still Ukrainian army is holding the positions inside the city, and the battles are ongoing at the outskirts and around.
Right, and why is Bakhmut so important? Because some people would say that it would provide a way for Russian troops to venture further west, right, to places like Sloviansk, for instance. But is there anything else? Is it just a symbol of, an important symbol for Russia? I mean, how do you see it?
To be honest, the importance of Bakhmut is only the PR thing. So the city is not strategic point in the area. So for the Russians and for the Ukrainian defense forces, for sure, Russians, they want to advance. And this is the only area they are advancing but they started operation to offensive into Bakhmut in the spring last year. So over a year they needed, and thousands of lives and millions of ammunition rounds to destroy the city, to make it scorchers, and maybe to capture it if the Ukrainian forces will withdraw. But it, of course, will open the path towards the western part of the Donetsk Oblast. But as you said, the Sloviansk city and the 15 kilometers south from Sloviansk, there is a huge major city of Kramatorsk. But steps to those cities stand on the hills, so it's going to be much more difficult for the Russian troops to capture those two important cities, much more important than the Bakhmut is.
Right, and sort of you've mentioned that some of this could be simply Russian propaganda. And speaking of Russian propaganda and various outrageous things that the Russian officials are saying, let's have a look at what happened in Delhi at a G20 summit.
The war which we are trying to stop and which was launched against us using Ukrainian people.
So does it mean that the world is not falling for what the Russians are saying? Is it a good sign? The laughs.
Of course, these smiles and the laughs of the diplomats, the world diplomats, at the face of Russia's foreign minister Lavrov says accept the thousands of words instead of thousands of words. So it means that the whole world see those claims that Russia didn't start that war and wants to stop it. And the whole society, the world society, see this as a lie, to be honest, right? So when it was the great sign, and the Lavrov was put up as a comedian, but Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov and other officials in the Kremlin, they call the Ukrainian president a clown. So we saw that the audience is laughing at the Lavrov statement, not at the President Zelensky's words and speeches outside Ukraine.
Right, but an important meeting happened on the sidelines of this G20 summit between Antony Blinken and Lavrov, as you pointed out. So let's have a listen to what Ned Price had to say about this. Well, it wasn't even a meeting, apparently.
You heard from the Secretary this was a rather brief encounter with Foreign Minister Lavrov. This was not a bilateral meeting. This was not a protracted discussion between the two. This was a rather brief encounter that the Secretary took advantage of to convey clearly and directly messages that are important to the United States and, in many cases, to the rest of the world.
Right, so Antony Blinken, time and time again, sort of warns Russia and tries to really point out that, of course, the country shouldn't behave in that way. Why do you think that he approached Lavrov yet again? I mean, is it even effective trying to reiterate the same thing over and over again?
So Lavrov is the one of the closest Putin's people inside the Kremlin, and 10 minutes is enough to send the message to Putin through Lavrov, saying that the United States are going to support Ukraine as much as it needed. Antony Blinken called on Russia to withdraw its troops from Ukraine, and probably he promised more sanctions and a Western combined reaction if the Russian forces or the Russian government would do something else towards the Ukrainian, because such signals are crucial and important, as if Russia is not deterred in Ukraine, the other dictators are going to see this as an example, and it will untighten their hands to invade their neighbors and other sovereign states, for example, like China, would like to invade Taiwan.
Right. And, I mean, what made me really wonder is that this G20 meeting held in India, of course, we perceive Russia as an sort of empire of evil now, but places such as India don't do so necessarily, right? The sort of commercial ties between the two countries have even strengthened since the invasion began, as Russia is exporting cheap oil to India. So how do you see that relationship developing? Or is it important for countries such as India to see what they're really dealing with, right?
There is nothing new in such Indian foreign policy. India, like for decades, was portraying itself as the new so-called neutral state, and now they are taking the advantage of the Western sanctions against Russia, and they increase their trade limits with Russia, and so they are profiting from it, so buying much cheaper oil, much cheaper goods, and just giving the Russia money. And Russia has a lot of money, so India is just trying to benefit, and very, very pragmatic from making the pragmatic steps out of this war. And but this meeting in Delhi they unfortunately didn't make a declaration. And a couple of weeks ago, the energy ministers also met in somewhere in India, and they also didn't have they didn't agree on communique because of Russia and China's positions on the paragraphs 4 and 5, as I remember correctly, about the war in Ukraine, calling it as an aggression. And calling to withdraw its troops, Russian troops from Ukraine. The same happened these days in Delhi while the foreign ministers were meeting in India.
Right, but India also recently saw an interesting guest. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz actually made a trip that has been, driven, I would say, by economic interests of Germany. How do you see that? I mean, is it a right course of action? Trying to perhaps also exploit an opportunity here.
They also probably did Olaf Scholz tried to bring India towards this axis, let's say Western axis against Russia. For sure, India will not go for it immediately, but talks and negotiations and the propositions of some benefits for Indian economy, the biggest economy in the biggest population in the world so far, as we know, is very important to India, because India needs to increase its domestic income for the people, and so Prime Minister Modi can succeed in other elections. And such visits are really important because Germany is a major economy in the European Union, and India is the major economy in this South Asia region. So it could be beneficial after some months, and we maybe could see that India is leaning towards the Eastern, let's say, vision of the ending of the Ukrainian conflict, and could step up as the mediator of this. But so far, not too much trust in Olaf Scholz, as far as for this last year, the German government behaved not so very strict towards the Russian aggression against Ukraine and supporting Ukraine, and wanted to benefit only the German government and the German budget, let's say.
Yeah, and it seems that the Germans are also not very strict with themselves, because Gerhard Schröder, despite his personal ties with Vladimir Putin, will remain a member of SPD. How do you see that?
So far, the European sanctions imposed on Russia, and they included the paragraph that is banned European passport holders, let's say, to obtain the positions in Russian energy companies. And so far, Schröder was in the Russian monopoly, in the Russian energy monopoly company, in the board of this company. So, but still, it's image minuses for the SPD going to be if Schröder will stay, and this party is only damaging itself, and if it wants to lose the next elections, as it was so they can put whoever they want. It's their decision, inner decision. I mean, but it's only going to harm and damage the image of this party. And of course, if such a people are going to be within the party and formed, maybe the next government, the others will see maybe not to form, and this party could just stay in there and go into the opposition and remain over there, and the others will gain the power in Germany.
Well, this will certainly be interesting to see. Thank you, Alexander, for your time and for your insight.
Thank you.
And this concludes the first part of World Today, but please stay with us as we'll be back after a short news bulletin.